Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever considered that the foundational facts you learn in school might actually just be incredibly successful fiction? Well, brace yourself because you have absolutely been lied to about some of the most famous historical events and figures in human history. Today, we aren't just going to correct the record, we're going to dive deep into the fascinating psychology behind why a massive lie is, a lot of times, way more popular than the actual truth. You have been lied to. Let's jump right in. So let's put this to the test right out of the gate, okay? Do you know the real truth about the Vikings? Or Marie Antoinette? I mean, really think about it for a second. When you picture a fierce Viking warrior charging into battle, what exactly is sitting on their head? And when you think of Marie Antoinette and the French Revolution, what's that iconic, insensitive phrase that instantly pops into your memory? If you're feeling super confident about your answers right now, well, you're experiencing the exact cognitive dissonance we're about to unravel. Which brings us to section 2. Famous historical myths debunked. Okay, look, despite literally every pop culture depiction you have ever seen, from blockbuster movies to Saturday morning cartoons to professional sports mascots, that famous, super intimidating horned helmet, it's a complete and utter fabrication. The myth tells us that Vikings wore these fearsome helmets into battle to strike terror into their enemies, right? But the historical reality? Vikings never wore them. Honestly, wearing giant horns on your head during close quarters combat would be an incredibly impractical, if not completely deadly, tactical mistake. Just to completely rewire our brains for a second, let's make this crystal clear. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. Absolutely zero historical reality to it. None. It's a really punchy, widely recognized image, sure, but it is literally nothing more than a wildly popular lie. The actual helmets they wore were just simple, functional iron caps. The horns? Those are actually added centuries later by a 19th century theater costume designer who was staging Wagner operas, and the image just kind of permanently stuck. Crazy, right? All right, here's our second piece of evidence. Let them eat cake. It is the world-famous phrase that supposedly defined the completely out-of-touch French monarchy. It's the quote that highlighted this extreme, callous wealth and total ignorance of the starving peasant class, the spark that lit a fiery revolution and ultimately led straight to the guillotine. It's the absolute perfect story of aristocratic hubris. But actually, scratch that. Marie Antoinette never said it. Just let that sink in for a moment. She never uttered those famous words. The phrase actually appeared in a philosopher's autobiography that was written when she was just 9 years old and living in Austria. So this radically deepens the mystery, doesn't it? If the Vikings didn't wear those helmets and Marie Antoinette never said that famous quote, why on earth do all of us, globally and collectively, believe that they did? Let's figure that out in section 3, the Illusory Truth Effect. To find our culprit here, we have to shift our focus away from history and over to psychology. The culprit behind this massive, global historical amnesia is a cognitive bias known as the Illusory Truth Effect. This happens when people believe false information is correct simply because of repeated exposure. You see, our brains are these incredibly efficient biological machines, but they take shortcuts to save energy. And one of those fundamental shortcuts is equating familiarity with accuracy. Basically, if you hear something enough times, your brain eventually just stops fact-checking it and assumes, hey, it must be true. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how a lie bypasses our logical defenses in 3 simple steps. It goes like this. First, a falsehood is stated. Like a costume designer adding horns to a Viking helmet. Second, that falsehood gets repeated over time in books, movies, or word of mouth. And step 3, the brain equates that repetition with truth. It's literally a step-by-step hijacking of human memory. The more you see the myth of the horned hermit or hear the cake quote, the truer it physically feels in your mind. The repetition actually rewires your perception of reality itself. 0. That's the amount of actual truth required for your brain to accept a repeated lie as a solid historical fact. I really want to emphasize this staggering reality. As long as the repetition is consistent and widespread, the truth value at the very core of the statement can literally be 0%. Your brain doesn't inherently require evidence, you guys. It just requires a really good echo chamber. Moving on to our final part, section 4, guarding against fake history. So, why does having this cognitive awareness actually matter for us today? Well, think of this as your personal mental defense manual. First off, just knowing about this phenomenon protects you against the illusory truth effect itself. Once you know your brain is actively looking for shortcuts, you can consciously interrupt that process. Second, Understanding how these historical myths spread exposes modern misinformation tactics. I mean, the exact same psychological mechanism that makes you believe in horned helmets is what makes people fall for modern fake news on the internet. Third, it encourages critical thinking over simple repetition. Just because you hear a fact everywhere doesn't make it real. And finally, it challenges our foundational assumptions, empowering all of us to stay sharp, curious, and incredibly hard to fool.
So, I'll leave you with this. If the most famous things you know about the Vikings and Marie Antoinette are totally made up, what other facts in your brain right now are just a product of the illusory truth effect? What else are you absolutely 100% certain about that is actually just a very well-repeated lie? I highly encourage you to question your assumptions, keep learning, and critically examine the information around you. Because, as we've seen throughout this explainer, history and the world we live in today is rarely as simple as a catchy quote or a dramatic helmet.